most would say was, the wrong decision, but intentionally stayed because I wanted to build things here.
See, and that's an important thing, because again, we know just the same way. We're laying foundations. We're walking through. We were talking about the idea of planting seeds, and the idea you don't know where the seeds that you're planting today are going to flourish in the future. You don't know how big those oak trees are, live oaks in our community, that are going to lead to really cool opportunities. Okay, so you're doing that. Now, this whole water sports thing, right? Okay, I've never met a professional wakeboarder in my life other than this guy sitting right here. Tell me about that. Like, how does that factor into all of this passion and this focus?
Yeah, so honestly, business college was plan B.
There we go. Okay.
I had a full ride academic scholarship, and I was first generation college graduate in my family, so my parents were like, absolutely not. You are going no matter what.
Don't mess that up.
And so I was there, but that was really my fallback. And I always have to asterisk this. Professional wakeboarder can mean a lot of things. I wasn't getting some luxurious salary or anything. I was getting a couple free boards here and there and traveling.
If somebody pays you anything to do it, you become a professional, right? That's the new language, right? I mean, like, hey, that's you got paid. If I wakeboarded, it would be only in the hopes that somebody took a video, and if America's Funniest Home Video still is around, that they would submit that there, and I'd make money off that for the 10% of the audience that even remembers that show.
I actually do have a couple clips and some YouTube fail compilations from some crashes. I busted my eardrum once.
Well, because you talk about severe injuries here.
Yeah, so when I graduated college, I'd saved up a little bit of money, told myself I was going to give myself 6 months to go make a stab at it as an actual career. Yeah. 3 weeks after I walked across the graduation stage, first contest in that kind of sequence, I get a Liz Frank injury. So basically my toes touched my shin. It broke every metatarsal in my foot. They put a bunch of hardware in there to basically give me a robotic foot where I, quote unquote, could not have that injury happen again. Rehab for 7 to 9 months, somewhere around there, went back and did it immediately again, bent the hardware that was in my foot. So we take the hardware out, still kind of maybe thinking I'm going to give this thing a go, and actually ended up getting an infection in my foot and almost lost my foot. After that whole thing, got back out on the board, and it wasn't ever the same after that day.
So for many people, that's the end of a career. That's like, hey, we're going to take things chill. We're going to be real easy. But as you're sitting here with D1 training on your chest, as I know your journey, as I know some of your tats, like you've not stopped in that journey. And I think, I want to kind of come around some of the founder's story here real quick, because endurance training is something that's still a part of your passion. I mean, it's something that you've done. You've been where as an Ironman? What have you done?
So Ironman only Florida. Done a lot of local races and things of that nature. I'm preparing for some super gnarly races this upcoming year.
I was going to say, we've talked a little bit about some of the things coming ahead.
Yeah.
It's going to be crazy when it drips.
But the funny thing is just getting into endurance athletics after that injury, it's like honestly exactly what the surgeons told me not to do. Like that would probably be one of the last hobbies to pick because it is impact directly on that foot. And I don't have any hardware in it anymore. I kind of wanted to let it naturally heal itself. And so with that comes a lot of things like foot swelling, having to wear a larger shoe on one foot, things of that nature. So it was probably the worst hobby to choose, but it just kind of adds that extra layer of like mental toughness to it.
And I think that mental toughness and the attitude and mindset, I think that's a really interesting thing. So let's fast forward / rewind back into you come through the experience in Mel's class. You pitch this, the mayor sees it, hears it, understands it. And then you start in pretty quickly out of undergrad into this idea of multiple businesses. You're co-founding, you're launching. Take us through, like, what does that journey look like? Okay, so some people, the idea is they're working to bake an idea for a long time. You are part of a kind of a group. You're like spitting stuff out every other week, it feels like. What is that like, Andy? What's the team like? How does that happen?
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, it happened because I intentionally surrounded myself with some mentors to put myself in that environment. Because I didn't start out a fire from the hip kind of guy. I was always very calculated and honestly like paralyzed by analyzing opportunities. Um, I would say the reason it happened so rapidly is because when I walked across a graduation stage, they offered me an MBA for free, to work a certain number of hours within the business college and basically in exchange for an MBA. And I told them thanks, but no thanks, because I feel like I've been like plotting for 4 years, and now I want to actually go out and do it. So I did, and I failed at the first thing immediately right out of the gate.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second. That's the reality for just about 100% of people. And I say just about because every now and again, somebody gets lucky on their first one. But the reality is, like, your first one, if you don't fail, you probably didn't swing big enough.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because the reality is, like, there's a lot there that you don't know, that you can't know until you try. And so, again, never, I say, throw all your chips in on the first bet, because then you're not going to be prepared for what that journey looks like. But there's a lot of value to that. So what did you learn in that first piece there?
Man, I learned so much, it's hard to even dissect a few things. The biggest one, probably choosing something like that is based off of your skill sets, not necessarily just a business opportunity.
All right, so a friend of mine, Brian Scordato, he talks about this. He says it's the difference between the whisper idea and the mountaintop idea. All right, he says like when you have to whisper it because you're afraid somebody's going to steal it, you probably aren't well enough prepared for it. But if it's the thing that's so like, oh, that makes so much sense. That's perfectly uniquely you. When you hear somebody say that about you, what that typically means is you've got that mountaintop. Like, you can shout it out. This is what I'm doing. Come and try and get it, because it's not going to happen. I'm going to be able to do it, and nobody else is equipped for it. So that's a big deal. All right, so you learn where your skills are. You're starting to adapt into that moment. You use a word a couple of times here, relational. How does that change your mindset as you're thinking about going forward and launching some of these other pieces?
And when I think of relational business, I just think of, investing in your community and like entering every conversation with like a servant mindset of like, how can I serve this person? If anything, give far more value than I receive from the relationship, knowing that down the road it will multiply and, it comes back around. I made a lot of others very successful in the community before I ever launched, anything of my own. So I think that it's super important. I mean, even with the ducks, well, Gulf Coast duck boats, I guess if I say ducks.
I was going to say the ducks, just so everybody has context. Let's like rattle through some of the things that you were working on at this time.
The ducks, we had a property management company that managed the fort.
Yep.
We had a restaurant, Sylvia's. All of that, I got those opportunities because I sought out a local entrepreneur and asked him to work for free for 6 months.
Okay, so that's an interesting one, because that's really contrary to a lot of stuff that we're hearing and seeing now, right? Let's say it again, because I think that's an important thing to reiterate. You did what for 6 months?
Worked for absolutely free. And actually created an internship from scratch because I felt like none of the options that were out there really fit my interests.
Okay, and this really is an old model, right? I mean, it's an old model of the apprentice and the person that you're learning under a master, you're learning under somebody. And jokingly, like I like to say a lot to college students, like, you can't pay enough money to get the right education. Yeah. And I don't just mean inside of a school. I mean, more importantly, it's learning from the people that are so skilled in that trade, that profession, that industry, that they're going to give you insights, experience, and opportunity that are, I mean, they're so expensive. So being there with them kind of transforms that. So that's a great lesson, I think, in that is like, hey, this moves in. All right, so you guys have launched out 3 different things. You've got the duck boat tour, you've got the real estate, and you've got the restaurant. You're doing this. I know you're thinking and building a lot of things as you're kind of coming out of this as well. I want to take a side turn here for a second. What's your vision at this point of what entrepreneurship is? Because I think this is a really important conversation, particularly as we think about this conversation around mental health too. Mm-hmm. What is this vision of entrepreneurship, and how are you seeing it at that point?
At that point, I would say it was, slightly delusional because we were stacking some wins on top of each other, which we later on got into some hot water because we thought everything we touched turned to gold, right? So at that moment, I would say that it was far more about like how skilled I am. I'm becoming an expert in my own mind and becoming less of a student, which is probably the biggest mistake that an entrepreneur can make. Aside from that, I was very caught up in, the approval of others. I love that I could walk down Royal Street and 10 people are going to say, "Hey, Andy? Yeah, how's it going, man? Y'all are killing it," which is awesome, and there's a place for that, but don't place your identity in that.
And I think that's an important piece. Obviously, we want to celebrate. We want to honor the people that are raising up businesses. We want to encourage their growth in that trajectory. At the same time, it's really important, not to get so comfortable with your own headlines. I mean, I think we're not the best that anybody has ever said about us. We're also not the worst anybody's ever said about us, or the things that we've done or on the high or low. And that's really important. So, we've talked about the distorted image and the things that are out there. And I think a lot of times, particularly for entrepreneurs in the South, there's a lot of challenge that are faced here. Okay, because the idea is we're not Silicon Valley. We're not getting unicorns everywhere. Therefore, we don't count and we don't exist. And the reality is about entrepreneurship is, you talked about it, it's how are we solving problems that real people have? Because when you do that and you do it well, it leads to customers, it leads to business, it leads to opportunities that are happening there. And so that's a really, I think, valuable piece. But it's also, how do we measure success?
What's different these days?
Yes. So let's contrast those two. What was the old measure of success for you?
Revenues, right? Public perception of myself. Am I, when I walk in a room, are people telling me how great I am? Then aside from that, I would say growth in terms of numbers. At that point in time, we wanted hundreds of employees and scaling to this, and which can be success for some people. But I've learned from just my personal strengths and weaknesses, I don't desire to have a massive organization anymore.
So you learn from those things. There's a break point, though. All right, and let's kind of cross over into that line. We're stepping into the COVID period, and for many entrepreneurs, COVID wreaked havoc. It wreaked havoc on businesses because, again, I don't know what my supply chain is going to look like. I don't know if I'm going to be well, if my employees are going to be well. I don't know if the customer is still there and is okay. I don't know what the government's going to let us do. I don't know any of this, on top of the other uncertainty that we're just experiencing as people, as we're disconnected from each other. Andy, you go into your own journey there. Talk, if you would, a little bit about what that looks like.
Yeah, so I had actually exited the tourism industry prior to COVID and opened a few gyms in the area. So I was in the fitness space, and we got demolished by COVID, right? So the government told us we had to shut down our facilities. One gym that's no longer open is due solely to the fact that it was a profitable business before COVID. We closed down for a little while, and when we opened back up, we wrote a check to that business every single month till it closed, half a year ago. So it affected me deeply, and probably on a psychological level because I felt like I was failing. However, the businesses were healthy prior to that shutdown. Then as a product of that, had free time on my hands for the first time in my life. And so I filled that activity space with partying and all of these things that, weren't moving me in the right direction on a personal growth trajectory, but were kind of numbing out like the reality of like what was happening around me.
Yeah, I think that's the numbing piece is there, because ultimately, you're talking about, you're such a driven person, and you know, just in the arc of your career that we've already talked about here, you're a high level athlete, you're walking through that moves into, even through an injury, you're still a great athlete, training, physically fit. You're running businesses, so you're supercharged. You're so amped in those directions, and when you go all the way. And I think that's an interesting and an awesome thing about your personality, is that like you're an all-in kind of guy.
Yeah.
But all-in can have its challenge, right? There's a great book out right now called Burn Rate, and it's written by the guy that founded Bonobos. And he talks about his own, I think it's Andy Dunn is the author. He talks about his own mental health journey. He says, like all the things that we're wrapped up in as entrepreneurs, and he uses the term burn rate, which in entrepreneurship is literally, it makes a ton of sense, because how much money do you have in that runway? How much you burn in each month? And he talks about his own life, like the burnout aspect of, I was so infatuated and encumbered with my businesses, I lost my identity.
Yeah.
And I think what's unique in the same thing for you is you've gone through a rediscovery process in your own identity of going back to some things. And so you go through a period of time, and you have those challenges, but then things start to unpack and unfold for you. Tell us through about like how you're kind of going through a dark place and then finding that light again, and finding the journey and the opportunities again.
Yeah, so I mean, around September of 21, we had a real estate brokerage that was doing very well. The gyms were going. We were kind of climbing back out of COVID. And I was involved politically with Mayor Stimson's reelection campaign. Like on the outside, everything was looking great. However, those habits that I had developed over COVID, then when all the businesses turned back on, tried to still maintain that lifestyle while juggling entrepreneurship, they really caught up to me. And I essentially, in September 2021, went into my condo and basically locked myself in for 2 years. Very minimal contact with the outside world. I'd let my phone be dead for months at a time. Exclusively fed on Uber Eats, like didn't even go to the grocery store. I had attempted a few times, but hey, the greatest asset, networking when you're in the community trying to do good, is also your greatest weakness when you're trying to not be noticed and go get your groceries, right? So 2 years of that, seeing therapists, trying medications, trying all of these things, it was just a roller coaster. Actually ended up gaining 100 pounds throughout that process. And September of 2023, so right at the 2-year mark, I got better. And just no way to credit it outside of God, because it was one day, so foggy that I don't even know the password to my MacBook. The next day, like building a business model for the foundation and things of that nature. So it was a rapid turnaround, and it has just been an upward trajectory since.
So you're starting to come out of the fog. You come out of the fog. You're walking through this, and what do you say to yourself so that you lead that better balanced life moving forward as you build the organizations, as you think about your missional impact? What takes place there as kind of that inner narrative that you're working through, and then even the outer narrative?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, I don't overcommit and underdeliver anymore. So when I started feeling better, I intentionally made myself wait 90 days to do any business, which is really tough to do whenever you're tiptoeing around bankruptcy. I hadn't earned $1 in 2 years. I was still servicing real estate debts and all these things. So it was truly a restart from a mental, physical, and financial place. but I intentionally, just focused on my health, getting the weight down, getting my mindset right. And from that point on, I made sure that, anytime that I was presented an opportunity, that I would evaluate it and say, like, okay, how much of, like, my life and things that I enjoy am I trading for this opportunity?
Wow. Okay, let's pause here for some, because I think this is a really important piece, and I want to go to something you said and then segue into this. So you said you've moved from overcommitting and under-delivering. Okay, that's an important statement. Second, you just said, how much of my life am I trading in for that? Because again, I think that's the reality. A lot of times we sit in those moments where we think, yeah, I can do that. I can do that, and 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 I can do that. Yeah, and I'm getting a look at myself right here because like that's a tendency that we have, and it's almost, I've found over the last couple of years, as a badge of honor, when you see somebody, the question was, hey, how's it going? Man, it's busy. It's busy. And busy was the word that we used in place of I'm doing well, or I'm doing poorly, or this thing happened to me. It's busy. And the eyes were almost devoid of life at that point, right? And so we are thinking more intentionally about, like, where do I want to leverage what I have? And what I have is the assets of my time, my resources, my passion. So you're walking through this. What do you decide you're going to leverage your time and resources and passion towards?
Yeah, so really the first day that I felt healthy again, I had a little whisper to, get back on my bikes, become an endurance athlete again, but this time, like, for a purpose greater than just Andy's the fittest dude in Mobile, Alabama. That doesn't do anything for me anymore. But if I can commit to these massive endurance races or just challenges, things of that nature, to raise money for the causes that I'm passionate about, then that's something that I can get behind now. So that was kind of the first thing. Then everything from that was conversations with organizations that could help me towards that goal, and I could help them as well.
And I think it's incredible. So again, D1. Sorry, that's somebody telling him he's supposed to be done with us by now.
Nope.
D1 training on his chest. You see the Keep Going Foundation. What are you doing differently now to make sure you don't fall back in an old pattern?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is my faith, right? So I have a completely new perspective on what it means to follow Christ and what it means to, be the light of the world, basically. So when I keep that front and center, I've noticed that a lot of the other pieces fall into place. But outside of that, that alone isn't going to keep you from burning out, right? So my days are very intentionally structured. If I look at my calendar now versus my calendar, 2021, Andy, it's hard not to be like, oh, is that guy being lazy? But it's intentional in recovery, in training, and all of these things. So it's a lot less, and I can't even say less busy, because, like, when I'm reading or when I am taking a walk, like, that's busy, that's activity, but it's making deposits rather than withdrawals from my overall, health.
All right, so that's a really important piece. I think let's kind of play into that a little bit. The idea of the withdrawal piece, okay? And I say withdrawals in the sense that, we have only so much in us, no matter how incredibly fit we are, how energetic we are. There's only so much that's kind of present in that environment. How are you laying deposits now? And how are you measured in the withdrawal? So you've talked a little bit about, like, I understand, can't overcommit. I understand it's only going to be so much that I can endure. What do you have any patterns like, hey, I know if it doesn't do this, or this, I'm out?
Yeah. So the first, like, litmus test it passes through is, like, if it's not a hell yes, it's a no.
Okay. And that's a really big piece. And I'm trying to remember if it was Derek Sivers or somebody else that was like, that's a really big deal. Because a lot of times, and I bet you did this, and I know I do this, it's somebody asks you, hey, Andy, I got this great thing I'm doing. I need you to be part of it. And it's like, sure.
Yeah.
You see that? That's like exuberance right there, right? Sure.
And talking yourself into those opportunities to make yourself think that you're more enthusiastic than you are. So I'd say that's probably like the biggest one that it passes through. I've said a lot more no's than I have yeses since coming back around. But
I want to hit that because no is a hard thing for a lot of people. How are you learning to say no differently now?
I think it's a muscle, actually. Like, it's getting easier now. But the best way is, like, it's no for a reason. It's not saying that this isn't a great opportunity or this isn't this. It's just saying if it doesn't align with the direction I'm headed in, then I can't be a part of it. And sometimes maybe that no is like, but I know somebody who might be beneficial.
There you go. I like that. Because, again, it's no, but it's not no, it's not important, or no, it's not something I see as valuable. It's no, I can't. But let me align resources. I think that's that's such an important one. And there's a lot out there on that, how we work to be able to establish that. And so thinking about it, if you're an entrepreneur, you're working through it, you know that you only have so much bandwidth. You're trying to think about that journey, and how do we do well in the process of things? That's significant. All right, take us now a little bit into what the Keep Going Foundation is focused on and doing, because you kind of mentioned this. You teased a little bit, and I don't know if you're ready to announce some of the other stuff that you're working on, but where does this idea focus you, and what's kind of the long-term vision that you see for it?
Yeah, so you can think of the Keep Going Foundation as really like a pass-through entity. So it's a fundraising tool for other nonprofits that some that we're actively involved with the board of, but like doing these endurance challenges to raise monies to put into organizations that already have the structure that just need more funding, right?
So you're helping reflect through a very focused activity on the great things that are happening around you.
Yes, so I'll go raise funds by doing anything from a triathlon to riding my bike across the country eventually.
Say that again?
Well, some details have changed with some sponsors that backed out and things of that nature, so we're not solid on a date yet. But yeah, eventually I will ride my bike from Virginia to California in one go.
I once rode my bike from my house to my friend's house.
Just like that, just a
like
lot of times in a row.
But you got to keep going, right? You got to keep going. Okay, that's incredible. So that changes a mindset even of planning and preparation. It changes that I don't know. Like I'm gonna admit, we were talking about this the other day. Running. I know you've done Ironman. You've done a lot of running, and I run when I'm chased. And that doesn't happen a lot unless it's like my dogs, or if it's part of a organized sporting activity. And I'll say, like, I played baseball, tennis, and volleyball. There's not a ton of running in those except baseball in 90-foot sprints. So the mind space as you're racing, as you're riding, as you're running, as you were swimming, like what do you do in that? Because I think there's a lot of really interesting time there that can be really productive and valuable, or it can be really destructive. So, like, what's that look like?
I think, like, whenever I'm on those long activities that I get some of my best thinking in, right? So I've had a lot of business ideas come during training. But the thing I get the most from it, and as it can relate to entrepreneurship, I'll kind of cater it to that, is like just doing something that sucks every day builds so much character and so much just like get through it attitude. No matter what you encounter along the entrepreneurial journey, it's like, man, no matter how hard of a conversation I have or someone who tells me a no and I was really, banking on a yes happens in my day, like it wasn't the toughest thing I've been through that day because that they don't know what I was doing before the sun came up.
They don't realize that that leg of mine has been robotic. Previously. Yeah, that's such an interesting thing. Do hard things, or another one that I love to talk about is embrace the suck.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to like there's going to be a lot of times it sucks, and I think that's an important piece of perseverance. I mean, I think just from the mantra, keep going. You know, it's a big deal. I was looking at something. Brian Johnson is a guy that runs an organization called Heroic, and his +1 note this morning was, "Do it now," and he goes back to like one of the things John Maxwell said, you know, years ago that he heard him in a presentation. Do it now. Say it 50 times when you wake up in the morning. Say it 50 times when you go to bed, and you start to embrace the fact that all the things that are hard that we're dropping off and not doing, you know, if we're talking ourselves out of them, let's talk ourselves into them, because I think again there is that hard piece there, and again for you, purpose. I mean, because again you're going to be able to utilize something that's really freaking hard in order to impact positively the organizations that are doing great work that you care about. That's incredible.
Yeah, and I'd like to asterisk, like, doing hard things, it's scalable to your own set of circumstances.
I'm not going out and running a marathon tomorrow.
Like, whenever
or next week.
With those first workouts, when I was 245 pounds back in September of 23, you know, a mile was harder than a marathon at my peak. So when I say do hard things, man, that might be like walking your dog in the morning or sitting in a sauna, whatever the case may be. So I don't ever like to speak about those things, because I am a way different message than some internet personalities you might see that just go hard and, you know, do the most you can physically do every single day. No, like just something really that you just kind of go, oh, do I have to today? Yeah. That can be fitness. That can be the phone call you don't want to make.
Getting the kids ready for school.
That can definitely be the case.
Those are the really hard things, right? The battles, yeah. I mean, I think it's a really important piece, and again, it transcends in a lot of stuff. When we do recognize that won't break us. Mm-hmm. It won't break us. It's an opportunity to move forward and kind of grow through that. And again, you don't go to the point you're going to stretch and break yourself to start. You right. Work to be able to get to that point. You're increasing and increasing. I think that's quite significant, huge in that. When you are out kind of talking about this idea of mental health and founders, what's kind of the message that you want to make sure other founders understand about the mental health journey?
Yeah, like I think that it's interesting that we don't speak about it as much, because if you talk to any seasoned entrepreneur, they're going to talk about the roller coaster of entrepreneurship. And I think that even begins, and part of what I want to contribute with Keep Going is like maybe even on a high school, college level entrepreneurship curriculum, like stress management, some form of health-related elective things that like we have to set ourselves in those habits of doing, because reactively, it's far harder than if you add that in proactively. And I was very focused on my health, intentionality, getting outside, getting vitamin D. I was checking all the boxes, and I still fell to burnout. So we just have to really make sure that we introduce that earlier on in the process. We have a lot of people, you know, who give you high fives and throw you a party the day of your grand opening, but like that's just the beginning of the journey and what's to come. Like we need to celebrate more so like check-ins with how are you doing as a seasoned entrepreneur, because it's once the glory fades away of the startup, like that's whenever you really get into the trenches.
And I think that's a really interesting piece. You know, I think a lot of times people get enamored with the on-stage experience that an entrepreneur has, or that somebody that's doing great work has, is they see what's out in front, and you know, it's the come hang out in the suck behind the stage.
Yeah.
You know, come hang out when it's working through this, because then you're going to learn where resourcefulness happens and persistence happens and curiosity. You know, before we went on this morning, one of the things Nick and I were talking about is like every time we run our coffee chats now, we want to experiment on something. And so finding the ways to be able to experiment and grow, because again, we want to make sure that we're curious and we're learning. And I think even you talked about like some of the checks that you put in your life. One of the things I think it's really important is having mentors.
Yes.
And healthy mentors who can call you out on your BS. That really can be present with you, because I think a lot of times it's easy to surround ourselves with the people who are going to say yes.
And selecting those mentors based on a 360-degree viewpoint. So in the past, I've looked up to certain people and connected with them and reached out based on the revenues they generate or the size of their company, completely disregarding like, how does your family life operate? You know, what is your faith like? What is your fitness like? So now whenever I am seeking advice from someone, it's almost like the business is like one of the last things. Like, how have you structured a life that's sustainable? That's what I'm more interested in learning. Then the piece on getting feedback from your mentors, like even if you don't quote unquote have a mentor, I think it's very important to have a small circle of people around you that you allow to audit you frequently.
I like that word audit. I think that's such an important term. And then as a quick tease right here, we're going to mention that next month, our coffee chat is going to be with Gia Wiggins, who is the founder of Auditosity. She's created an HR SaaS platform. I got a boo from the audience. It was just Nick, so we'll take that into account. But it is important, again, to audit and to keep track of those things. I think, it's too easy to get lost and I think the highs or the lows. I think it's too hard sometimes for us to recognize, the lows are going to happen. One of my mentors said, it always costs twice as much and takes twice as long than you expect.
Absolutely.
And then the qualified next by, if it was easy, everybody would do it. And the reality is not. It's not. This stuff is hard. And I think, we're in a time that entrepreneurship, the barrier to entry is as low as ever, and that's great and important. But it also means that, we've got to learn to be comfortable in trying and growing and learning through those things and moving on that side. So
and constantly course correcting.
Yes.
Like there was one point in my career where I would look down upon like someone changing their mind or pivoting, right? Like, oh, it sucks, he had to pivot. Now it's like, man, I want to change my mind and adjust continuously, because if I'm not headed in the right direction, it's way easier to get the plane back on track when it's 1 degree off rather than when you're on another continent.
Yeah, and I think that's an important difference there, because again, it's not like we can't be people that are unstable in direction as we think about building out businesses, but at the same time, we have to continually have our eyes up to see and make sure that we're course correcting as we go. That's a great point. Well, what we're going to do now is we are going to go offline and give a chance for the folks in the room to ask questions and have some dialogue. If you want to be part of that in the future, join us every third Wednesday of the month at 8:30 a.m. for our coffee chat program in 2024. We are talking about founders' stories. It's a great place to be with us in downtown Mobile, 358 St. Louis Street. You can join us, follow us on social, and you'll be able to see when those events are coming up. As I mentioned, Gia Wiggins from Auditosity is going to share her founder story in April. What we're going to do is thank Andy Vickers for joining us, and we're going to go offline. If you've got thoughts or comments, you can drop them in the chat below, and we'll go from there. But we're going to give our audience here in person a chance to go deeper with Andy. So thank you so much. Have a great one.